Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Based on the time you are accessing this material, welcome to Web Development course. And this is a course taught on coolchat.com. If you are accessing this video on YouTube, you can visit coolchat.com to have the course content and also some code that you can also use on your programming. So if you go to courses, then information technology courses, then we have web development over here. So you just click on it. And today we are going to consider form and how we can process form. So on many applications, you normally see a form, you are asked to fill it and submit. So today we will be able to see how you can write a form and how you can process the form so that when the user submits the form, how you can handle it. Okay, so that's what basically we are going to consider. So that's week 6, the basic ATM tasks. Then we will learn about how to use get, how to use the post, and how to do form validations. Then we'll come to the Ajax technology. Then we can see how we can upload a file. Then we'll see, we'll write a form, we'll submit it to the server, we'll do several of them. Then you can display the content of what you have in the database. Remember, previously we learned about database. So we will apply the database knowledge in this week lesson as well. Okay, so as you already know, my name is Godwin. As I've introduced myself in the previous lecture, right? This is your first time. Please remember to consider the other weeks before you get to the week 6 of this week lessons. Okay, so let's get started. So in order to see it clearer, I'm going to zoom the content so that it can be more bold. And you should start your XAMPP. You start your XAMPP and your MySQL. So both the Apache and the MySQL must be on since we'll be using both the server and the database. Okay. So form is used to take information from a user which is later processed, stored in a database or sent to an email, etc. Okay. So in this example, we are going to see how we can store the information in a database. Then forms are used to build interactive web application where a user can submit a form and be given the feedback. So we normally use form for interactive web application. So later on, I think that the coming week we'll learn about how you can create a login system where a user will enter the uh, username and password. Then the person can log in. Of course, if it's general application where a customer will create an account, so first there will be creation of an account. So you need a form to create an account. Once the form has been created, an account has been created, of course, the user can log out. So once the user log out, they should be able to log in again. So all this interaction with the web application is the form that make it possible. So that's basically what we are going to study this week. So if you want to be a PHP or web developer, this week lesson is very, very important. If you can't create a form and process it, then you cannot do this job. Okay. So a form is written with the form tag. So we have less than, then form. Then we have a method. So the method specify which kind of method you can use to process the form. So there are basically two methods. We have the get and the post. So if you want to use the post method, in this place you write post over here. If you want to use a get method, this place you write get here. In our subsequent slides, we will see the difference between the get and the post. Okay, but I can briefly talk about it. For the get, the information is passed in the URL or the what we have here. So this example, it can be an example of a get. When you post a form with a get, you have some writing like this, where we have the key, which is the name of the form, then the value. The value is after the equal to. So all the key or the names of the forms are uh, separated with end to separate one name and its value from the other one. So for example, this an example is a get method. Okay, so in the get, we can use a link also for the get, and we fetch the value in the URL. Okay, but for the post, it doesn't show in the URL. So when you post, it uses the HTTP post to send the information to the server. Then it's being retrieved from the server and it's being processed. Okay, so for a sensitive information, we normally use a post. And if you are going to upload the file to the server, we use a post. So basically, this is what differentiates between the get and the post. If you want to pass your information the URL and get the data, then you use post, use get. But if you want to pass it to the server without showing it in the URL, and you also have to upload the file, then we use post for that. Then the action specify the file to which you will use to process your form. So if you are going to use process.php to process your form, then this side is going to be process.php. Okay, if you are going to use, for example, add person.php to process your form, then this place is going to be add person.php. So the file you use to process your form will be over here. Then in some cases, for example, when we come to the Ajax technology, you need to give your form an ID so that in the JavaScript that we write, we specify the ID, then we write a script what should happen when that form has been submitted. So in that case, if you are going to use Ajax, you will need the ID. You need to give your form a unique ID, which you use it in your JavaScript for the Ajax technology when you are submitting the form. Okay, so that's basically it. So I've explained the post and the get. Then we'll come to the form content, which is the form element. So as a web developer, you need to know all the form elements and what they do. Okay, so we are on the input element. So the input element, there are so many types of input. So when you start with the less than the input tag, then you specify the type of the input. So here will be the type of your input. Then all input has a unique name which we use to access or retrieve the value. So all the forms should have a unique name. Unique name is that the name should not be the same. So the unique name uh, should be different. So each input should have a different unique name, except the radio button. For the radio button, if they are the same option, one option that can be selected, we give them the same name. Okay, so all inputs or each unique input should have a unique name as well. Then we have a placeholder. A placeholder is a plain text which is written as like a brief description on the input so that the user knows what to insert in that input. So once the user starts typing, the text disappear. Okay, so that's basically what the placeholder is. So input has a type, so you specify the type, it has a name, so you give each of the input a unique name. Then it sometimes also have a value. So a value, when the value is set, it will the input will have that value which you set. Okay, so this, if you want to set a value of your for your input, then you can have a value is equal to, then in the double quotation you can assign a value to it. And as I said, a placeholder is a brief description of your form. Okay, so these are form types. So you must know them as a web developer. So I'm going to briefly talk about it. So the text input type is for taking text from the user. So if you are going to take a text from the user, you specify the input type to be text. If you are going to take a number, a numeric number from the user, you specify the type to be number. If you are going to take a password so that the text will be hidden with asterisk, then you specify the input type to be password. If you are going to take an email address from the user, then you specify the input type to be email. Now the advantage of specifying an input type to be an email instead of a text is that for an email, when you specify it to be an email, normally the browser also adds some form of validation to it, so that if the user has entered that field and the email address is not in the correct format, the browser will alert the user that the email is not in the correct format, so the user can enter the right format email before this form will be submitted. But if you make it text, then the browser will not know that it is expecting an email in that field. So basically, if it's an email, you can specify that as an email. Then the mobile phones too. When you have an email input, once the input is focused, then the at symbol will also be shown in the keyboard. Okay, so you specifying an email input also uh, instead of a text has a couple of advantages. Okay, then the hidden normally, if you want to put value in the form which is hidden from the user, then you call this hidden input. So you make the input type to be hidden. Then you can assign the value to it so that when the form is being submitted, that value can be fetched and processed. For example, if you have a form for example, editing a person. So if you have a form for editing the person, then at the server side, you need to know which person information you want to edit. So for example, in the database, you can fetch the token value. And so in that form, we can have an input type to be hidden. Then we assign that token in that hidden text field, so that when we submit the form and we fetch that input field, we know that, oh, okay, this information which we want to update is concerning this particular person. So we can write a query based on the token that is hidden in that form to update the person's information. Okay, so that's basically one advantage of the hidden. So if you have a form where you want to hide some information from the user, then you use the hidden input type. So when you go to the server, then you can fetch that value and process it. Then for the file input, if you want to upload the file, the input type is called file, and that makes it possible for a browse button will be attached to your input. So when the user click on it, it directs the user to the file where it wants to upload. Then we have the checkbox. The checkbox is a box for ticking. So you make it possible for a user to tick. So you can have multiple tick, okay, for the checkbox. Then we have a radio button. So radio button is also like a checkbox, but it's circular in form, so the user can tick on it. Okay. So like I've said, for a radio button in which the option can only be one, you give them the same name so that that option can only be selected once. For example, when we come to the gender of a person, so we have two radio button with the same name, for example, being gender, but their values can be different. One value can be male and the other value can be female, but they can have the same input name so that only one option can be selected. Okay. Then we have the submit input. So the submit input provides a submit button so that when it's being submitted, the form will be submitted to the server. Then we have the text area. So the text area element is also a form of input, but that one is a rectangular box where the user can enter some information in it. Okay. The input has only one row, but for the text area, it can have multiple rows. So you can specify how many rows you want for the text area based on how much size or height you want for that text area. Okay, so the text area tree is the same. You have text areas, the elements. You give the text area a name. Then you specify the number of rows of the text area over here. Then remember, for the text area, the values come between your text area. So remember, for input, we put the value in the tag, the input tag, but for the text area, your value will be between your text area tag. So like you open the text area here, you put the value there, then you close the text area tag. So always remember that. So if you are going to assign the value to your input field so that in that box there will be content in it, the content should come between your text area tags. So the opening tag and the closing tag. That's where you put the value of that input. Okay. So if you want to initially assign a value for your input, you can make it empty. So the input text can be empty. And later on, if you fetch the information from the user, you can also reassign that input if you want to keep the information the user has entered so that, for example, if there is a validation error, it's not advisable for the information to disappear. So you keep it so that the user can make changes and submit again. Then the next is the select element. So the select element is a drop box where a user can select from. So for the select, we have the keyword select. Then you give the select box the select of a name. So the select element, you give it a name. Then the select element, it has options. So you list all the options. So you use the option tag and the value. You specify the value of your option. So the value of your option comes here. Then the text to describe the option also comes after the option. Then you close the option tag. So as many options as you want. Okay. Now in the case where it's compulsory for an option to be selected, it is advisable to put the first option to have an empty string over here. Then you can make the description to be select so that when we fetch at the server side, when you get the value and it is still empty, by default the first option will be selected. So if it is still empty, we know that the user has not selected any option, then we can tell the user to select something. Okay, so all the options that you have, you can put them in the option tag in the select. So select the name of the select, then each in between the select tag, you have all the options you want. The option tag, each value, then the description of your option, then you close the option tag. Okay, so that's basically, so an example is the gender. So we have select name, gender, option value, select gender, then value, option value, we have male, then male, then option value, we have female, then female. So the female, this part is the descriptive text. This is the value of when that option is selected. This is the value when that option is selected. Okay, and like I explained, the first option, make it to have an empty string. Then you make it select. So then you describe the what it should select. Okay, so when we submit the form and the value is empty, we know that you haven't selected because the drop box is still on this option. Okay, then we have the checkbox. So the checkbox, as I've explained, is also an input type. So you specify the type to the checkbox, then you give it a name. Then the description of your checkbox comes after your. So when you open the input for the checkbox, you close it here, and the description follows. Okay, and the description follows. Then, for example, if you have favorite fruits, you can have input type checkbox, name is orange, then you have orange. Then input type checkbox, name mango, then mango, and so on. So all these ones will have a checkbox for the user to select. Then we have the radio button, like I have explained. So you have the input, the type is radio, then you give it a name, then you give it a value. Okay, then the text also comes over here. So the checkbox in the radio, you close your input tab, then the description follows. Okay, so an example is the gender, then the name is Linda. Remember, if a radio button can only have one option, the name should be the same. So we have the name gender, there's the value which varies. So here the user can only accept select only one option from these radio options. Okay. So if the names are different, then the user can select all of them. So make sure that for a video a button that only one option can be selected, the name must be the same. Okay. And the file input, we have the type should be file. Then you give the file a name. Okay. Then if the file will contain multiple files, which means it allows upload of more than one file, then you can make this attribute, you write this attribute the multiple. That way it allows the user to select more than one file. Now in case you also want to accept a particular file type, then you can use the accept attribute also. So you write accept is equal to, then you specify the file extension that can be accepted over here. Okay, so that's you can have the unique file type specifier, so specify which file can be accepted. So for example, input type file, name, certificate, accept, image. So all types of image it can be accepted, or a PDF extension. Okay. So when the user click on the browse, it will show only image and a PDF file. Now for a form, when you are uploading it, there will be an upload on the form. You write the end type is equal to multipath slash form data in it. So your form will you have in the form tag you have something like this. Okay. So this you add to the previous things we talked about the form, that information. Okay. So in the subsequent example, we are going to create a form, add person. The add person will have a first name, last name, phone, email, gender, date of birth, profile, hobbies, picture. Then when you click on add, then we will fetch the information, then we will process it at the uh, server side. Okay, so now you can create add person.php file, or if you are writing it in the folder, you are writing in a folder, you can make it index.php. So wherever you want to put that form, you can create it. So I'm going to create in my example, I'm going to create a folder in my HTTP docs. I'm going to call it form, or uh, I'm going to call it practice. Okay, so practice. So this in this practice, I'm going to I'm going to save my file as index.php. So when I go to localhost/practice, my form will show. Okay, so I'm going to start my notepad plus plus and new. Okay, so we are going to save it in our practice. So see exam HTTP docs practice. Okay, so I'm going to call it index.php. Okay, so we said a form starts with, okay, so the form starts with the form tag. So the method, since we are going to upload the file, we are going to use the post method. Then action, you specify the file to process your form. So in my example, I'm going to process it with add person.php. So add person.php. Okay. Then this one we are not going to process with Aja, so I don't need the ID, but I need the end type. Okay. So the end type is multipart slash form data. Okay. So let's verify if that is correct. So type end type multipart slash form data. Okay. So that's correct. Okay, so when you open your form, you close it. Okay, so we take it one at a time. So our first one is our first name and last name, and the descriptions have been bold, so you can bold them. Okay, so we have, and there's a description on the form, so I can use H4 for the description. So add person. Okay, so the first will be my P for first name. Okay, then I can have my BR for the input. The type is text. Okay, the name I can call it FN. Okay, so this one, if you want to assign a value initially, you can assign, but the value can be empty. Okay, then you close it, then you can close your P. Okay, so the ones which have the same type, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm going to copy this, then I can change their informations. So the second one was last name. So the name, I'm going to make it Ellen. Okay, Ellen. Okay. And the second one, the third one was email, I think, or phone. Okay, phone. Okay, so the name I'm going to change to phone. Okay. And the other one, I think, is email. Email. Name it email. It's email. Okay. So I save this one, I refresh it so that you can see what is happening. Okay. So I say localhost slash practice. Okay. Okay. So far this is what I have. So I'm going to continue. So is the third one is gender, which is a radio button. So I have my gender GR. Okay. So input. So the type is radio. Okay. And the name is gender. Okay. And the value. The first one is male. That will be value. So you close your tag, then you write the description next to it. Okay. Then the second one is the female one, so I can copy this one. I can continue with that. So the description is female, the value is female, it has the same name. Okay. So I'm going to use this one to describe to you. So first I'm going to refresh my form, then I'll select one of the radio buttons. Okay, so as you can see, the gender, I cannot select the two at the same time. You see, I can't select the two at the same time because they have the same name. Okay, can't select the two at the same time because they have the same name. Okay, so I can't select the two at the same time because they have the same name. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to change the name for this one. So I'm going to make it gender 2. Then I will try to select both and see so that I see what I'm talking about. If, now the names are different, so I should be able to select the 2. Okay, so it says see is believing. So as you can see, I'm able to select the 2. So for a radio button, which you have only one option, the name must be the same. So all those input names, they must be the same. Okay, so that's only for radio button, only for the radio button. Okay, then we continue. So after that, we have date of birth. So the date of birth is a select. So we have select for day, select for month, select for year. Okay. Now in our previous week, we learned about the for loop, and they start from 1 to 31. So we are going to write a for loop to start from 1, 2, 3, and the rest to create the option for our select for our day. Our months, we are going to manually write it from January to December, and the value will be from 01, 02, 03 up to 12. Then the year, we are going to start from the current year to 100 years ago. Okay, so we are going to use loop for this and that. For this one, we are going to manually write it. Okay, so let's get started. So like I said, anything that you learn on the course is applicable. So that's why you need to do more practice. Okay, because if you learn something today, you apply it in a future project. So make sure you follow whatever we are doing. So select the name is day. Okay, so our first option will be of value empty, and the description says day. Okay, okay. So the subsequent option is the one we are going to look for them. So we have for our I is equal to 1, our I is less than or equal to 31, our I class, we are starting from 1 to 31. After that, the loop ends. Okay, then we'll have our option in our loop. Okay, so you can copy this option here. Okay, so the value of the day will be here, and the description will be the value of that day. Okay, but since we have 1, 2, 3, up to 9, they all be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but we want it to be in a form like 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, up to 0, 9, then 10, 11, and the rest with they will all be in 2 digits. So we are going to generate a string. I'm going to call it D. So I write a condition if my value of my I is less than 10. Okay, if it's less than 10, my D is equal to I add 0 and the I value to form that string. Okay, so if I is 1, it's going to be 0, 1. If I is 2, it's going to be 0, 2. If I is 3, it's going to be 0, 3. If I is 9, 0, 9. But if it is 10 and above, our D is just going to be the value of our I. So it's going to be the value of our I. Okay. So here is just going to echo our value of our D. So echo D. Okay. So our D will have this value. Then the description text can also be the same. I have it here. Okay. So we echo the value of D, we echo the value of D also in the value. Then the descriptive text will be the echo the value of D, then we close the tag. Okay. So this is for the options for the day. Then we can close our select button. Then we can close our select button. So let me close my P and refresh, then I do the other side so that you can see. So I refresh. Okay. So as you can see 01. So this is a empty one for the description. So we have 01, 02, and so on up to 31. Okay. So we continue with that for the month. So we select name is equal to month. Okay. So the other one, the name is day, and then this one name is month. And that one to the first option will have a value of empty text, and the description is month. Okay. And that one we are going to start from January up to December. So I can copy this and I can have 12 of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. So this one will be 01 for January, and 02 for February, and 03 for March, and 04 for April, and 05 for May, and 06 for June, and 07 for July, and 08 August, 09 for September, and 10 for October, November, 11 for November, and 12 for December. Okay, then we close our selector. Okay, so the next one will be for the year. So we select name is equal to year. That one to have an empty value for the first option. We have here the description. Okay, then that one too, we are going to write a PHP loop which will start with the current year. To get the current year, we use a function called date. So the date with a single string y produces the current year. Okay, so we can our start will be equal to the date function y value. So this video was made in 2021. So the start value will have 2021. Okay, and it's going to end 100 years ago. So n is equal to start minus 100. Okay, so it will end. So we are going the date of birth. So in the case the what we are doing, it's impossible for someone to be 150 years old now. Then you can maybe, but some people are 100 plus. So let's make it 150. So from now till 150 years ago, we can have that date. We can have that year. Okay. So now we can start our I. So for our I, starting from our start, and we are starting from the top to the bottom. So normally we have what greater than. Okay, so we start from here where it is greater than or equal to our end value. Okay, then we are going to decrease our I. Okay. Now we have our option in our loop. Okay, we can copy this option here and put it over here. Now our value will be the value of our I, so we echo our I value. Okay, and the descriptive text is the same, so we can copy and paste it over here. Okay, so that will be for the here. We close our select tag. Okay, I'm going to refresh my page. So I have months January up to December. Then I have from 2021 to 150 years ago. 150 years ago will be 150 years ago. One years ago is 1871. Okay, so if there is someone who is alive at that point, then we can have it. But if you make it 100 years ago, for the 100 years ago, some may be 105 or more. Okay, so in that case, so here there is no M in October. Okay, so that is it. So that is it for the date of birth. So we continue the other parts. So the next one is profile, which is a test area. Okay, so we have the profile. Okay, so BR is a test area element. So name is profile. Okay, now if you want about 5 rows, you can make it rows with 5. Okay, then we close our test area. Remember, this is how you close a test area. You don't close it over here because there will be something between normally. So we have the opening and the close. If there is a value, you just put it over here. Okay. So you let me put next one example. So my name is Godwin. So if I refresh this in the test area, I'm going to get my name is Godwin inside it. Okay. As you can see, my name is Godwin. Okay. So that's so your text replaces between your text area value over the value for a start. This one is empty. Okay. Now after that we come to the hobbies. So the hobbies are checkbox. Okay. So P hobbies. So each of them are checkbox. So input type checkbox. Okay. And that one you have a name. So we have started with reading. Okay. So we have reading. Okay, so I'm going to copy this for the other ones. So how many are they? So 1, 2, 3. So reading music. So listen to music. Okay, then you can close our tab. Okay, so the next one is our picture file. So picture input type is equal to file name, call it picture. Okay, so you can specify the file type to be only images. Okay, so we can have all images. Okay, so here it will only show images when the user selects the option to upload. Okay, so now followed by the submit button to add. So we can have our input type submit. And the value, the text that shows on the button is where the value is. So we have add. Then you can close it. Then you can close up. Okay. So now we can refresh our form. Okay. So that's our form. Okay. So like a front picture, so you can select the file. So when you click on it, okay. So because you send images, only images will be shown. Okay. So wherever you put, you have only images. If there are no images, it will not show anything. Okay. So that's it for the form. So that's the form. We are done with the form. So I believe from now on you should be able to create your own form. So if you are writing an application, now there will be user registering, then you can do the registration form. Okay. So now we are left to process our form. So how do we process our form? That's the next stage that we have. So processing form. Okay. So we use a set. There's a function called set to check if the form has been submitted. Okay, so if the method is post, you just use the $_ over here, then the name of your input. Okay, so the name of your input, any name of your input except radio button or checkbox. You can't use the name of a checkbox or a radio button because until a user tick or check, they are not set. So it will never be seen as the form has been submitted. Okay, so you use any other input type except the radio button or radio or checkbox name. For any of the input type, their name, any of one of them, you can use it to check if the form has been submitted. So if then it's set, then underscore $_ if it's post, if get, okay, then one of the field, the name, except radio or checkbox. Okay, so now what we are going to do is that this form, we said we are going to use a file called addperson.php to process it. So I'm going to create that file, then I will write the code to check if the form has been submitted. So okay, so we said first if is set, then $_ if the form is post, it's post. In our form is post. So here they use any of the names of the input types except radio or checkbox. So in our form we can use either this one or this one, or that one, or this one. You can't use this radio, okay? You can't use this radio. You can use the select. You can use this one. You can use that one. You can use that one. You can't use this one. You can use this one. You can't use this checkbox name. You can't use any of these names, okay? Or we can. This one too. It has a unique way of checking for each value. So you can also leave the file for now. So any of the other types of file for input type, which is text, email, or phone, or I forgot to name this one, email input type. So here I'm going to email. Okay. So I'm going to use just the FN, any one of them. So I'll choose the FN. Okay. So FN. Okay. So here, if the form is submitted, since we have the form by name FN, then the form will be submitted. But if the form has not been submitted, nothing will show. So I'm going to echo form submitted. Okay, form submitted. Okay, so first I'm going to open that file. So if I open that file, nothing will, this text will not be displayed because the form has not been submitted, so it will not go into this curly bracket. Okay, so if I have my local host, slash practice slash add person.php. Okay, so as you can see, it is empty. Okay, but if I submit this form, you see that form has been submitted because it's saying this part of our form by this name. So it's supposed to be one of your input names. So the input can be number, the text type, password type, and so on. Okay, so any of those inputs you can use them. Okay, so basically that's it. So to get the values of your input is the same thing. We use dollar underscore then post. Then you can have the name of your input. That's why each of the values are supposed to be unique. That's why each of the values are supposed to be unique. So we can get our first name, our FN value. So FN, $FN is equal to dollar underscore post, then that name. So remember, the name you have here should be the same name you have for that input. Okay, so you can get the other ones the same. So the last name we name it Ellen, so that one will be Ellen. Phone we name it phone. Email we name it email. Okay, so we can have our Ellen. Ellen. We can have our phone. We can have our phone. We can have our email. Have our email. Okay. Now, for your radio buttons, in order to know if a radio button has been checked or not, it is appropriate to first of all initialize a variable to be empty. Okay. So gender is equal to empty. Okay. Then remember, both radio and a checkbox will only get the value if it has been set. Other than that, if you don't write that information, if it's set and you are using their name to fetch the value, you are going to get an error. Okay. So for example, if I write gender is equal to dollar post gender. Okay. Now, if okay, so if I remove this part. So now, if the gender has not been ticked, any gender has not been ticked, and I am calling this thing, I'm going to get a syntax error because it's going to tell me that it has not been set. Okay, so that's why normally for the radio and the checkbox, we check if it has been ticked already we before we get their values. Okay, like it's an undefined index gender because it has not been ticked. Okay, now if I take it, you see that the error goes away. Gender. So when I take it, the error will not be there. As you can see, no error. So now for them, for radio and the checkbox, you need to check if it has been set. That means it has been ticked before you get their value. So you have to write if it's set. Okay, so they are dollar, so dollar post and the name of your radio, then you get that value. Okay, so that's for your radio. Now for the checkbox, normally we initialize variables for each of the checkbox. So when it has been set, then we can change our variable initialization. So for example, in our hobbies, we have reading, we have watching movies, dancing, listening to music. So we can create variables to store. By default, we can set reading to be 0, movies to be 0, dancing to be 0, listening to music or listening to music to be 0. So if it is tick, then we change that value to 1111. So that if you store it in a database and we are analyzing it and it is 1, we know it has been ticked. If it is still 0, we know it was not ticked. Okay, so we initially set the value to be 0. Now if we check and it has been ticked, then we assign a 1 to that variable. Okay, so we have reading is equal to 0. And if it's set post reading, okay, and our reading value is going to be 1, equal to 1. So we do the same thing for the other. So after reading, we have movies. Then the movies, then what else? Dancing. Okay, then music. Music. Then the value of our music is going to be 1. Okay. Now we left the profile. So profile, profile. Okay. So I think we retrieve all the values. Okay. Now for a file, we use as it explained over here. Okay, so we've done all this part. Okay, we are left the day, month, and year. Okay, so we are left day, month, and year. Day, month, and year. Month, and year. Okay. So now the file. Okay. So later on we'll do this, but you can as well check it. But when I process it and it's successful, I will display the content. Okay. So I've talked about this one already. Yet to do the validation. I'm jumping to the file part. So processing the file input. Now to get the name of the file which the user is submitting, so the name of the file on the computer, we use dollar underscore. Remember this one is files. Then the name you give to your input, so the file input type and the name you give it to it. Okay, then you have name over here. Okay, so either you copy or you can write it however you want. So I can have this one, I can call it picture is equal to, okay, so here I called in uh, the name I gave to it was picture. So if you can see it over here, the name of the input is picture. Okay, so the name is picture. So if the name is image here, it's supposed to be image here. So the name you have in the form. Okay, so now I have my picture, I have my other fields. So the next is the validation. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the validation. Okay, so the validation, we use the method called empty. Okay, so there is a method called empty which has already been written by PHP. Okay, so in the PHP environment, this method has already been written called empty. So we'll empty pass it takes in a variable and check if the a variable is empty or not. So we add the if condition with the variable, we pass the variable to it. So if that variable is empty, it means the value, the user has not entered any value inside, so it's empty. Then we tell the user to do something. So here we just display enter your first name, for example, in this example. So if empty, here the variable you are passing to it is the first name, which is the fn variable. So if it is empty, you just display text, enter your first name or enter first name and so on. Okay, so we are going to do that to validate all our input. So and normally we do one at a time. We don't display all the errors at the same time. So we are going to use if, else if, then else. Okay, like we've done. So else is when everything is correct, when everything is okay, you have it in the else. Any other validations, they all be in if and if else. So we check if empty our fn, our first name, okay, we display to the user, please enter your first name or first name. Please enter first name. Then we close it. So else, if our last name is empty, last name is empty, enter last name. Okay. So else if our phone is empty, if our phone is empty, please enter phone. Okay. Now this is an introduction to PHP. So I'm not going supposed to go deeper, but as you do more projects and you acquire more knowledge and the concept of the things we learn, especially function, you just Google how to do something, then you get an idea how to do it, then you implement it. So in your future project, when you take the phone number, you need to also check if the phone number is correct or not. But it's not idea that I will bombard you with so many information when you are not learning the concept. Okay, so I'm going to skip the validation of the phone, whether it is valid or not. So far as the user enters something, he assumes it is correct. Okay, so then else we check the email. And the email too, there's email validation, but I'm not going to talk about it because it's not advisable. I bombard you with so many things when you are not learning the concept. So please enter email. So after email, what else do we tell the user to enter? So gender. So gender, if our gender is empty, it means user has not selected any gender. So if gender is empty, please select your gender. Please select gender. Gender. Okay. Then after gender, date of birth. So for the date of birth, we check all at a go. So if empty our day or empty the month or empty the year. Okay. So if any of them is empty, that's why we use or if any of them is empty, we ask the user to check. We ask the user to check the date. Please check the date of birth. Okay. Okay. Now later on we will see how you can write a function to check if the date is valid. So if a user selected the 1st February, then we know it's not a valid date. Then we ask the user to select and check the date of birth as well. But for now, we are checking if it has not been selected or not. If any of them has not been selected, then we just tell the user to check the date of birth. So after date of birth, then we ask the user to enter uh, the profile. So if empty profile, then just enter profile. Okay. Now for the hobbies, we will not check if any of them has been selected. But if you want to check that it's compulsory that user select at least one of the hobbies, you can also create a variable you call maybe check. Okay, so or you can call it hobbies check. Then you make it to be false. So if in the if is set, if any of them is set, you check it to true. Okay, so hobbies, let's say hobby check. Initially, I can make it to be false. Okay, so now in the if is set, if any of them is set, I'll set it to be true. So where I set their value to be 1, I'll just make it true. Okay, so if it is compulsory, when you check and the value is true, it means at least one of them has been taken. Okay, so at least if one of them has been taken, then we have it. So now if it's compulsory that you take at least one hobby, then we check if it is not checked. So if not, which means if it is false, we tell the user. If it is not true, we tell the user to at least tick. So please tick at least one hobby. Okay. But if it's not compulsory, you don't need to validate that part. Okay. Whether it has been ticked or not, you just ignore it. Okay. Now the picture 2, you check if the file name is empty. So we've already taken the file name over here in this code. So if our picture is empty, so else if picture is empty, we tell the user to so else if empty picture, we tell the user to upload the picture. Okay. So now any other thing, okay, we have the else. So it means we check everything. So now we assume all the code is okay. So now we are left to save our file to the server. Okay, then we'll be left to save our file to the server. But show just I'm going to show just some few. I'll submit this form and yes, so please enter first name. Okay, so this form, it goes directly to the form processing, but it's not an ideal way to do that, because when the validation failed, then sometimes the form code may be lost. Some browsers, they may keep your history, so when you go back to the entered values, not all of them may be kept. Okay, so it's appropriate that your form that you create, the user's information will still remain so far as the form has not been successfully processed. Okay, so that the user can make the few modification and submit again. Okay, so in the subsequent time, we'll talk about how you can accomplish that using both the agile technology and using the same file to process, uh, the same file for the form to process your form. So that one will come to that later. Okay. Now what are we left? Now we've checked all the fields. So if all the fields are okay, now we have to save. Now over here in the picture tool, we later write a function to check if the selected file is an image. Okay, so even though we write the allow file to be image, sometimes also advisable we check again, because someone can uh, change the extension of a file or something. Okay, but if for a safer note, you can also check the file validation and check if the extension is an image or not. Okay, so we continue with our notes concerning how we can save our image. Then we can continue. Okay, so we use this function. We'll be using this function to get the extension of our file. So if our file is .png, it will return png. If it is .jpg, it's going to return jpg. If it is .gif, it's going to return gif. So we will get our file extension, because when a user is uploading a file, you need to rename the file before you save it on the server, because with an application where multiple people will be using the server, there may be an incident where the file name may be the same. So it is appropriate for you to rename the file that the user has uploaded to your server, so that all images uploaded to the server will have a unique name. So in that case, you need to know the extension of that file before you can rename it. So you get the extension of the file with this function. Okay. Now we have this function also to check if the file is an image. Okay, so this is a function I've also written that you can use to check if the file is an image. So it gets the extension, then it check if the extension is in any of these values in the array. So if it is in the array, it means it's a valid, it's an image, else it is not an image. Now we can use this function to generate a token. So a token, like we saw in the database, a long text that normally is generated to create some uniqueness in whatever you want to be unique. So the probability of it occurring will be very less. Okay, so we can generate a token, then we'll add the extension to it. Then we can have a new file name which we will use to rename the lesson. So the new file name is going to be the token that we've generated. Then we add dot, then the extension, and that gives us the new file name that we'll be saving the file to. Now to save the function, the file, we use copy. So PHP has written a function called copy. So what does copy takes? Copy takes in dollar files and the name of your file input. Okay, so in this form, the name of my file input is picture. So it means in my case, picture will be here. Then you have your PMP underscore name over here. This is fixed, so you have it here. Then you show the path where you want to save your file to. It's like you are making a copy to this for a path. So the path is made up of the folder slash the name of the file. Okay, so that gives you the path of your lesson. So to check if the file has been successfully uploaded, we use the if condition because the copy returns true or false. So we check if it's true, it means the file has been uploaded, then we do something. Else, if it failed, it will tell you, give the user an error message. File upload failed. Okay. So if your path, your folder, you have a folder called profiles, and that's where you're saving your file. So the new file name, you add it, you join it to your folder. So that will be the path where you save your file to. Okay. So now we are going to create a folder in our project called pictures where we'll be saving our pictures. So I go to my practice folder here. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm calling it pictures. Okay. So this is where I'm going to save my person images. So if I go to pictures, I'm supposed to see images. So first, I've uploaded some things to the server. Okay. So we have to add the above function. So I'm going to add the functions that we've created. The function for the extension. Okay. So you can at this level you don't need to understand some of the functions, but you can study it. Okay. In your project you can be using the functions. Okay. So we have the get extension function, and we have the validate image function. Okay. Then we have the generate token function. Okay. Then in this slide, I've also written. Okay, I've also talked about how to check. There's a function to check the date. If the date is correct, we call it check date. Okay. So I'm going to scroll so that we can do all at a go. Okay. To save more time. So checking date. So I've skipped to this page. So checking date. So there's been a function called check date. So this check date takes the month variable and the day variable and the year variable. So if all of them are okay, it returns true. So if you want to check if it is not, then you have the exclamation, then the method name, then we pass the month, we pass the day, we pass the year. Okay, so if it is not, we just explain, we just ask the user to check dates. Okay, so we are going to put it at where we have the or empty day, empty month, and the rest. Okay, so we'll have it here so that if even though they are not empty, if okay, so or we have another or. So if they are not empty, but the date option values are not of the correct date, then we also tell the user to check the date. Okay, so that's what we have there. Now that we also have our validate image, then we can also validate our image as well. Check if the uploaded file is not an image. So we can also continue with else if okay not so so the name of our file we got from the user's computer is picture. So if the picture file name is not an image, we tell the user only images are accepted. Okay, so only images accepted. Okay, so you can have maybe APG, some APG, back, PNG, or GIF. Okay, then we close the P. Okay, so validate image. Okay, so else everything is okay. So if everything is okay, we generate. We first of all get the extension. Okay, so extension is equal to get extension, and we pass in our file name, which is a picture. Okay, so our image, the new name is going to be we set token, so we generate token, then join the full stop string to it and the extension. Okay, so our path is going to be the folder. So the folder is supposed to be pictures. We create a new folder, we call it pictures. Okay, then we join it to the name of our path. So we have it image. So image. So we, the name we generated and the folder where we are saving it to. Then that makes the path. Okay. Now we copy. So to check if it has been saved to the server, we can have if. Okay. So if copy. Okay. So we said dollar files capital, then the name of your input, so picture, then we have tmp underscore name. Okay. Then comma the path where you want to save it to. Okay. So if this has been saved, you tell the user information successfully. So later on, when it has been saved, later on we also record the information on the database. So we write a database function, then we end with our form submission. But for now, for temporary, I'm going to be doing form information successfully recorded. Information successfully recorded. Okay. Then else tell the user it failed. So recording information. Okay. Now, okay. So now if the file has been saved to the server, and we just write information successfully recorded else failed. Later on, if it has been saved to the server, we record all the other information to our database. So we write a function to store all the information at the database. So we will create a database, then we will write a function to store that all the information we acquire from the user, all these informations we acquire from the user, then we save it to the database. We write a function, we pass all those variables to that function, then it will save all those information to the database. But now I'm going to test and I'm going to select a file and upload it to the server. Then I check if it is in that folder. Then I do the database function next. Okay, so I refresh my page, I fill information to maybe login, show, two, four, one. How many digits do I have? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 1. Window can have test at test.com. Okay, then male, gender, date of birth, have January 1st, 1990. Okay. But let me not select this one. Okay, if I don't do that, because you are not keeping the values, I have to fill it again. So let me make sure all the fields are set so that it will just do what I want to save the file to the server. Okay, so I can take any of these, any of them, and I choose a PNG file, which is an image in the server. Let me choose this one. Okay, then I add information successfully recorded. So I go to my pictures folder and see if I have that image. Okay, so as you can see, I have that image over here, and that's the new file name I've given to that image. So now we are supposed to store the image name on our database. Okay, then all the other information that we receive from the user, we are going to store them on the database. Okay, if everything is okay. Okay, so as you can see in this browser, Chrome, now they make the browser more intelligent. Previously it wasn't so, but now they made the browsers more intelligent so that when you go back, it keeps the information you previously selected. Okay, but in those years, those times, when you go back, everything disappears. Okay, so if you are writing a form, it's better you keep the user's information and you give the error message so that user can make the modification, then it submits again. Okay, so now we are going to add the database to our form. So we've done all these parts. So we are going straight to the database part. Okay, so it says create this table called persons. Okay, so we've done database already. So we just copy and we paste this script in our database. Okay, so the name of my database is test. Okay, so I'm going to create this table. So I copy and paste it in the SQL. First, you need to select the database like we thought we've done in the previous lesson. The SQL, then you paste your query inside. Then you click on Go. Okay, so that creates the database, the table for your person. So person, you have the first name, you have the last name, you have the picture, you have the phone, you have the email, you have the gender, you have the date of birth, you have the profile, we have the reading, movies, dancing, music, then the token. The token is for uniquely identifying the user. Okay. So in your bigger projects, you need this token so that if you want to do update to your certain role, you use the token to update the value because you can put the token in the URL. So when you get that token from the URL using the get underscore get, okay, then you can know which uh, row you wanted to update, then you can update that particular row. Okay, so that's it. We've created the table. So we are going to write our database function. So the database function has already been written in the lecture notes. So I'm going to explain that function to you. Okay, so this is a function add person. So function add person takes in the first name, the last name, the phone number, the email, the date of birth. Remember, the date of birth is in the year, month, then day on the database. Dates are written in the year, month, and day. So you need to construct your date of birth that you fetch from the user. You fetch the day, you fetch the month, you fetch the year. So you need to generate that in that format, year, month, day format. So year dash, month dash, and day in that format. That's the value we pass in this function. Then we pass the profile, we pass the gender, we pass the name of the picture that we've named, and the reading value, the dancing value, the movies, and the music. Remember, the dancing values, we set them to be integers. So when we're creating our table, they were all in integer. So 0 means that the person didn't check. if it becomes 1, it means the person has checked it. So we can show it in our interface that the person has taken it. Okay, so now we connect to the database like we've done in the previous lessons. So we create a connection variable and we call MySQL connect. This is the name of uh, the host. So here it is local host because it is on the machine. So if you are writing a project where your database is on a different server, then it's going to be the IP address of the public IP address of that server. Okay, then this is the database, the username for the database, and this is the password for the username of the database. Then the name of your database. So as I explained to you, the name of my database is test. Okay, so here my database name is test. If your database name is different, that name will be here. And by default, some data user account doesn't have a password. If you create a new user account, then that password and the username must come here. Okay. So this is a connection variable. You need a connection variable before you can insert a value. So you generate that connection variable. Now you generate a token for each of the user that you add. So you have the MD5. So MD5 generates a token. So you can have MD5 and you pass in a value which is the time span, which is the time span, that moment, the time span, the units time span. Then you join this one will generate a token. Then you join it to another token will generate from our token function, which we've already written. Okay. Then we generate our SQL query. So the query is going to be insert into persons, then the names of our column. So first name, last name, picture, phone, etc. Okay. So text, we said you need to put a single quote around them. So all the text, we need to have them single quote around them. So single quote around them, single quote. And the integers, the day two, you need to have single quote around them. And the integers, just their values over there, over there. And have the token. Then the date, if it's a current date, then you write the current date function. Okay, so date is the current date you are doing the insertion. Then to insert, you use a MySQL query. So if check if it is true, if it has been inserted or not. If it has been inserted, so the MySQL query takes in your connection variable and the query that you've written. Okay, so if it has been inserted, you return true. So we check. So in this function, it returns true if insertion has been done. Okay, so if it has not been inserted, it returns false. Okay, but before we do the return, we need to close our database connection. So MySQL close and the database connection. MySQL close and the database connection. So I'm going to copy this function and I'm going to add it to my script. Okay, so I add it to my script here. Okay, so now after the upload has been done, I check if insertion has also been done. So if call the database add database function, so add person. But before that, I need to generate my date of birth. Okay, and remember, if you change the order of your argument, you will insert wrong information in the wrong field. So remember the order it is. Okay, so you can even copy if the variable names are of the same type. You can just copy here so that the order will be the same. Okay. And if you change any of the variables and they are all of the same data types, then you will not see it that you interchange the argument order. Okay. So if you call this function and it has information has been inserted successfully, you say information inserted successfully. Other than that, it also gives that. So So here you can make this one image upload flow because it's talking about the image. So image upload flow. Okay. Then here is going to be flow recording information. Okay. Now we need to generate. So our file name, our picture, our file name is this one. So here is going to be an image. The rename, the file we rename, that's what's supposed to be there. That's the name on the server. So that's, remember, the name, the picture is no longer the name on the computer. It's the rename, the file we rename with the token and the extension. So that's what we pass it. So it's this file, image. So that's the file, this one. Okay. So that's the file we need to pass for the picture side. Okay. So if I think all the other values are the same. So now we need to generate our date of birth. So our date of birth variable is going to be equal to our day, our year, then we add dash to it, then our month, then we add dash to it, then we add the day to it. Okay, so that will be for our date of birth. Our date of birth is equal to year dot dash month. So this will join the year, then the month will join, then the day will join. Okay, so now let me select another file and upload. Now it's supposed to save it to the database if everything is okay. Okay, so this time let me upload below. Okay, so I add. So you see information successfully recorded. So when I go to my database, if I go to my person's database, I'm supposed to see the information there. So as you can see, that's the information. Okay, so that's the information. So that's the name of my picture. Okay, my phone number, the email, the gender, the date of birth, the profile, reading, movies, dancing. It means I took the movie. That's why it is one. Dancing, then a unique token. Okay, and the time, we make this one current times one. So the time it was inserted, the date. Okay, so basically, so that's it for form processing. So now we are going to talk about how you can make it possible that you remain on the same page while the form is being processed, so that user will not have to go when there is an error, go back, then do the change. It will be on the same form while everything is happening. Okay, so there are two methods to do that. So now there are two methods. You either use Ajax technology or you use the same form page to process the form. So if you are using the Ajax technology, then you need to do certain things so that when the user submits, it doesn't move to the file that will be used to process it. It remains on the same page, but the information will be sent to the server, and the server will process it and also give the feedback to the client, the browser. And the browser will also display the feedback that the server gave. And that technology we use Ajax. Okay, so we are going to see these two methods. So we are starting with the Ajax. So what is Ajax? So Ajax is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So that's what Ajax meant. So asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So Ajax is not a programming language, but it uses a built-in browser XML HTTP request object. Okay, so it makes a request object, then you get a feedback. Okay, so Ajax application might use XML to transport data, but it's equally common to transport data as a plain text or JSON. So sometimes you can pass to the server the plain text or a JSON text. Okay, and then the server will also process and also gives a feedback. Okay, So Ajax allows web pages to be updated asynchronously by exchanging data with a web server behind the scenes. So you have the interface, but something may be happening behind the scene with the server, but you not take note. Okay, so that's basically what we use Ajax technology for. So this means that it's possible to update parts of a web page without reloading the whole page. So you can use an Ajax. For example, if you have an advert, okay, that you want the content of the advert to be changed, then you can have the script which you use the Ajax technology to connect to the server after maybe every 5 minutes to fetch a new ad. Okay, so the user don't need to refresh the page to show a new ad, but the Ajax technology will fetch the ad and display it in your the place where you want it to display. Okay, so that's how the Ajax technology works. So we have the browser, we have the server. They are being both connected by internet. So the browser connects to the server by using HTTP requests. Then the server also gives a response to the browser. And the browser processes that response. Okay. So now to use the Ajax technology, you need jQuery. Okay. You need jQuery. So if you are using a project that one using the application will not be connected to the internet, then in your project you need to have the jQuery file in it. Okay, so you download the jQuery, then in the folder where you want it to be, you put that jQuery inside. In this example, the jQuery is in the JS. So in the JS, you need to have the jQuery file there. Okay, then you include this one in the head. Okay, now this is there are resources you can use. So I will download this resource. Okay, then I will extract it. Then I will get the jQuery file from it, and I'll follow the other procedures. Okay, so extract. Okay, okay. So here we need a jQuery. So this is a jQuery in the JS. So I'm going to copy this JS, the entire JS folder, into my project. So I'm going to put it in my project since it contains a jQuery. And since the jQuery is in the JS, I can use the same reference in it. So I have it here. Okay, so now I'm going to change this file. Okay, I'm going to, for me, I'll use the same information. I'll modify the file. Okay, but for you, in order for you to make reference to what we are doing, you can change the Ajax technology. You can change the okay, but still, I'll just use a different file. But in the lesson, we are going to use the Ajax technology now. So in the Ajax technology, you can have your HTML. Okay, then you have your head. The head is where we refer our jQuery inside. Okay, so we will link our jQuery. So we need the reference to our jQuery. So in the head, we put it over there. Okay, then we have our body, and the head is the body. So all this is the body of our form. Okay, then we close the body, then we close our HTML. Okay, Now with the Ajax technology, like I explained, we need to give the form a unique ID. So here I can give it a unique ID. I can call it add person form. Okay, so I've given it a unique ID. So this ID is what I'll use in my JavaScript function to write the attribute that if that form has been selected, it shouldn't submit it by to use Agile technology to process the form. Okay, so that's the next step. So first, include the jQuery scripts. Okay, so if you can download the jQuery script, you can download it online, or you can download the resources and extract that file. Then you can get the jQuery from that resource. Okay, so you download it, unzip it, then in that folder where you have the jQuery, you put it in your folder, then you refer it here. If you are connected to the internet, you can as well use the jQuery link, which is a jQuery file which is on the Google ips.com. So you can as well include this one instead of the local one. This you can use if your application will not be connected to the internet, so that it will be included in your project. But if it will be connected to the internet, you can use the link. Okay, you can use the jQuery link, which is found on the Google ips.com server. Okay, so either you use this one or you use this one if your jQuery is in the folder of your project. Okay, now the next thing is that you write a jQuery. The jQuery form is going to be in our document dot get document already. Okay, so you have these parts of your scripts also in your head. And in the curly brackets of our document dot ready, you write the form Ajax function to process the form. So each of the forms will be using Ajax technology to process them. Then you just write their function over here. So I'm going to copy this. I'll have it in the head, and that is also a script, so it's supposed to go in the head. Okay, so we have it in the head. Okay, okay. So that's it for our script. Okay, so we will put our jQuery functions to process our form between these curly brackets. Okay, but before I will copy and put the that function there and explain, I want us to refresh my page. I'm going to refresh my page. Okay, and like I said, I'm going to change the form processing so that uh, so I'll see add as adjust. I'll just add adjust to this one. Okay, so later on we will just write the form processing, which is going to be similar to this, but we'll just make some few modifications so it will be not be too difficult. Okay, so now in the I'm going to refresh the page. When I submit, you will see that it will go to add person adjust.php. But I haven't created that file yet, so I'll get file not found, but just for you to see just an example. Okay, so if I submit this one, okay, you can see that it's going to adjust add person adjust.php. Okay, but it's not there yet. So okay, so now when I add my Ajax technology, when I submit this, it's not supposed to go anywhere. It's supposed to remain there. Okay, so it will not move to anywhere. So when you do that, when you add your jQuery function and you click and it didn't go anywhere, it means your function is working. If it goes anywhere, it means you are not doing something right. Perhaps you may not have included your jQuery, or your jQuery function may be uh, wrong or something. Okay, so now this is our jQuery function which you can use to process any other function, any other form. You only change the ID of your form over here. Okay, So in this example, I've given the ID to add person. So I can just copy and paste it there. Then I'll explain what it is doing. Okay. So remember, it says your function should be between these curly brackets. So I'm going to paste it over here. Okay. 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 So in this function, the yield.prevent default is the one that makes it that when you click the form, it doesn't move to uh, the file, the action file which was specified. Then we have a field we will call it feedback, where we will give the user a feedback so that the user knows what is happening. Then we'll have another div where we'll be showing something, a spinning animation so that the user will know that something is happening. So initially we'll hide any feedback, then we show the spinning. Then we'll use Agile technology to connect to the server. Now on successful connection to the server returns this data. Okay, this data we get from the server. Now since we receive a response from the server, we will hide our spinning, which is the animation. Now we will use a technology which later I'll talk about to fetch the data which was passed from the server. Then we analyze it. Okay, so the feedback will tell us whether the form submission is successful or not. Then the response is going to be the message. So all the error messages and the successful messages, will put them in the response. So when we pass it to the client, then the client will know what kind of response it is. Okay. So now if I save this and I refresh my page and I submit, the form is not supposed to be go, because this add person ID is the same ID we have in our form ID over here. And we've written a JavaScript function that when it's being submitted, it shouldn't move to the file where we have the action specified. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this. Okay, then I click on the add. So as you can see, it's not, I'm clicking but it's not going, then it means it is successful. Okay, so but if I remove the jQuery, so if you do and it is not going, it means your jQuery has not been inserted yet, so your jQuery function is not working. So if I delete this jQuery and I refresh my page, you see that when I click it will go. So if you do it, so you see that it points there. Okay. So if you do and yours point there instead of remaining on that same page, then maybe you don't have your jQuery embedded into the distance. And if you are using the Google jQuery link and you don't have internet connection, that one too, it will not work. Okay. So I'm going to have internet connection, of course. So I'll use a second Google link alternative to, and I refresh and submit. So if I decide not to use the jQuery on my project, but use the Google IP link, then if I refresh, you see that one also works. So any of them that you want to use, okay. So that's it. Okay, now I'm going to explain this code which I have explained, but we need to do certain things. We need a CSS, a style sheet for the screening, for the animation. Okay, so I'm going to copy in the lecture notes. I gave you some CSS. Okay, so I'm going to copy this CSS and I explain them for you. Okay, so this CSS I wrote them for you. And this CSS, this one styles the input fields. But what I want to draw your attention is the animation ID. So the animation ID, we gave it a display none. So display none makes it that you don't see it on the page, even though it is there. And this is the class that we use to show the spinning object. So this is our spinner. So the spinner, then we have the keyframe for rotating. Okay, so this part shows the spinning object. Okay, and this is the color of our spinning object. So if you are using it in a project and you want to change the color of your spinning object, this is the part where you can change the color of your spinning object. So this is a spinning object, and this gives us a feedback for information, success, warning, error, and the rest. So the error will have its own background color, success will have its own background color. Then we also have the icons for the errors. So you can see that it says that this icon is in images folder. So in the resources, there is an image, there is a folder for images. So you can as well copy that images folder and put it in your project. So in your project, you can have it here. Okay, so in the images, we have the error icon, we have the info icon, we have the success icon. This is what we need. Later on in our uh, project, we may use a search if you need to do the search in the final project, but this is what error and success is basically what we need for today. Okay, so I'll put them there. Okay, so now I'm going to copy our CSS. And remember, the CSS, we put them in the star tag in the head. So I'll copy this one. Okay, so here in the star in the head, I'll have my star tag. So star, and I close my star. Okay, and I have them over here. Okay, so now to show my spinner, I'm going to create a div below where I submitted the form and call that class spinner class. Then I'll refresh my page. You're supposed to see, so I'll be showing the animation below this form. So I can have div class is equal to my spinner class. Okay. Now this class shows the spinning object. So if I refresh this page, now you are supposed to see something spinning below it. Okay, so that's a span and a spinner. As you can see, it is spinning below it. So it is spinning below my form. The spinner takes it's centered. Okay, so if you want it to be at a particular width, then you put it in a div of that width. Okay, that it will be centered in that div. So later on we'll have our animation div. So we are going to put our spinner in our animation div. So we have a div, our ID is animation, and we written the CSS that that div should not be displayed when the page load. Okay, so when it means it's not being displayed, it means the content will not be displayed. So when we refresh this page, because we have this attribute animation ID to be displayed now, it will no longer display our spinner when we load the page. But when we submit the form, the jQuery in the jQuery, it says that when the form is submitted, we should show it. This does show means that the div will be shown, so it will become visible again. So our spinner will be spinning. Now, when we get the data from the server, we hide it. So we call the function hide, which hide the spinner. So when I refresh it, the spinner will go because it's in the animation ID, which we said that it is gone. Okay, but when I click on listen, it has come. Okay, so now I can the animation, I can give it a width that the spinner can be somewhere here. So I'll give the animation div width of 400. Okay, so in the CSS for the animation, I'll give it width of 400. ID animation. I'm going to give it speed of 400 speed. Okay. So if I refresh, submit, so that it has reduced. Okay. So if I want to make it 200, I can make it 200 so that it gets a little bit closer below my form. Okay, so now that's where it is. So if you are okay with it, then that's it. Okay, so as you can see, it is finished. So that's, we have done that part. So now we need to work on our agile technology so that we will pass. So now we need to work on the form, the processing of the form. Okay, so I'm going to create the file where I will be processing my form. I've given the action to be add person agile.php. So this is the file I need to use to process my form. So add it. Okay. So now we are going to use the technology to pass information to our browser. So from the server, we will communicate with what we call JSON. So we call something called JSON technology. Okay. We call something called JSON technology. Okay. So we've left with the feedback ID. So I can copy this feedback ID and put it in the below the spinner. So when we get any feedback, that's where we'll be displaying that information. So we'll display any feedback in this box div by this ID. Okay, so there we display the information with this script HTML. We call it HTML. So there, remember, hashtag means ID. So this div by this ID feedback, the HTML means write this HTML code in that div. So we write our HTML code. In that HTML code, we said if feedback in the server side, if we give a feedback to a 1, it means that the form has been submitted. Any other value of feedback which we initially set to be 0, it means it's not successful. So we give an error message. So not successful, which means our feedback is 0, our give an error message. When our feedback is 1, we give a success message. Then on the server side, we pass the message in the response field. So the response will contain the message, and the feedback will indicate whether the form has been successfully submitted or not. And that technology we use is called JSON. So as you can see, there is called JSON. So the JSON, passive JSON will extract the text from the server into JSON format. Then the JSON format will use the key of that array to fetch their value. So here we have a key by name feedback. Then we also have a key by name response. Okay, so that's basically that. So now we are going to talk about our JSON technology. So JSON. So JSON means JavaScript Object Notation. So JSON, JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. So it's a syntax for storing and exchanging data. And it's a text written with JavaScript Object Notation. So the exchanging of the data. So we have the text which we convert to JSON, or JSON we convert to the text. Okay. Now, when on the server side, we will create an array where we have the key of that array, feedback, and the variable for the feedback. Like I said, the variable will be set to initially to be 0. When the form submission is successful, we set it to 1. Then the response will contain the messages of the response. So if there is any validation error, we put that message inside. If it's successful message, we put that message inside. Okay. Now this is an array. Then we will use a PHP script called JSON encode. So the JSON encode will convert this array into a JSON format, which we will pass to the browser. So in the browser, where we have our jQuery, which I have explained to you, we will get the value of our feedback, then we get the value of our response. Then we can analyze it and process it like I have explained to you. So for the response, we will display it in the feedback box, what the response is. And if the feedback is 0, it means there's still an error, so we display an error message. So, but if it's 1, we know it's successful, so we display a successful message. So we are going to modify. So I've explained this one already. So we flip them from this, the one from the server. So we flip the values with this and key. The key we have in there. So the key for feedback is feedback. The key for response is response. Okay. So now I'm going to copy the same response. This one, the the file we use to process it. We will do some few modifications. Okay. So where will the modification be? Where we have this P for the messages is going to be the response variable. So we assign all those information to our response variable. Okay. So initially it means that we need to initialize our response variable. So here our response variable by initially is going to be empty, and our feedback initialized variable is going to be 0. Okay, so we initialize it here. Now all the places where we have the error messages, we are just going to put those values in our response variable. So we have response is equal to, so all of them will be in the response variable. Okay, so we close all this. So I'll put this in here. And close it here. Okay. Okay. So this is because we've already written that script already. But if you are not writing it, then you just write them straightforward. So in the curly brackets, you will put the error message you want in the response variable. Okay, but because it's just a script we've already written, so that's why I'm editing it. Okay, so we just put the error messages in there. Okay, so basically that's what I'm doing. I'm putting all the error messages we've previously written in my response variable. So that will contain my messages that I want to pass to the browser. This one also have okay. So basically that's it. So we've kept all our error messages in our response variable. So wherever we have a response, both error and the successful, those responses, we put them in our response variable. Now, if the form is successful, we also need to change our feedback variable to 1. So we have feedback is equal to 1. Okay, so this is when the form is being successfully submitted. So our feedback value needs to change to 1, and our response information is going to information successfully recorded. Okay, so now we need to uh, send this information to the server. So the server sending the information, like I've explained to you, we use the JSON encode. So we just echo our JSON format for our feedback and our array. Okay, so the JSON encode will encode our array, which the key is feedback, and the value of our feedback, and the response, the key is response, and the value, whatever we stored in the response variable, will be in it. Okay, so once we refresh our page and we submit, now it should be able to be communicating with our server, displaying the messages. Now remember, we need the feedback D because all the messages have been inserted into the D by ID feedback. So the HTML inserts that value. As you can see, this is HTML. So it inserts that one in that div called feedback. Okay, so you need to have that div over there before you see the response. So this is the div by ID feedback. So what we get from the user, which is the response, we generated an HTML code to insert that information over here. Then this controls the screening. When you click on the button, it starts to spin. When you get the response from the server, it stops. Then it displays the feedback. Okay. So now if I refresh and I submit my page, I'm supposed to get a response. So as you can see, that is the response. Please enter first name. So it continues. So if you want your feedback dimension also to be smaller, you can use CSS to give your feedback a width. So you know the IDs, we use the number tag for them. So feedback, okay, you can give it a width of maybe 400 pixels. Okay, so if I refresh and I have it, you can see that's the feedback. So remember, if you don't have the error icon, you don't see this part. So you make sure that in the resources file, you copy the images folder into your project, then you can see the error. So now I'm going to fill the entire form and submit, then you see the outcome. So first name this time I'm going to write yourself, Mensa, then you can have any phone number, 500001. How many do we have? Supposed to be 10 years. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Then we have our inbox. So to demonstrate the inbox thing I'm talking to you about, so if we have text, And if I submit, it will tell me, you say, please include an at. So it validates the email by the browser. So testing.com. Okay. So gender, male, date of birth, 3rd March 1993. If today the person was born, today is 4th, 8th April. So 8th April. Okay. Now let me yeah, I'm going to show you the wrong dates. So I'm going to choose February. Okay. 2021. There's no 21 days in February, so it's supposed to tell me to check my date of birth. We check date of birth as you can see. Okay. The function check date is working if the date of birth is incorrect. So I'm going to choose today is 8th April 2021. Okay, so it says enter profile. Ooh, like full chat.com. Okay, so let's tick at least one of it. So you tick, so to demonstrate, I'll tick everything. I'll leave one. So let's say dancing, I'll leave dancing. Okay, and please upload a picture. So I'm going to upload a picture. So this time I'm going to upload this one. Okay, so add it. So information successfully recorded. Okay, so you can see we have the file already there. Everything, we didn't move to the listen, we only communicate with the server. Okay, now in the situation where we want the page to be reloaded when it's successful, you can also write location.reloaded. Location.reloaded will make the page reload. So if is a form for entry information. So once the first one, our successful entry, you reload the page so that everything collects. Then you can write this function uh, location.reload. So location.reload will reload the page for you after it's been successful. Okay, but that's if in your future project, if that's what you will need. But we will consider that one when we do our project. In our project, we have something similar. When we are adding some information, we need to reload the page. We will see an example of that as well. So that is basically for the Ajax technology. So if we go to our database, we will see the information over there. New information has been inserted. Okay, so now we have two informations. Mr. Mensah and Godwin Ashun being submitted. Okay. Now if you go to our server 2, we should have two images there. We have that of this and that one. Okay. So we have this. This one was the last one I uploaded. So they are there. So everything is working as it's supposed to work. So our last part is when you want to use the same file to process your form. You use the same file to process your form. Okay. So I'm going to use the same this index.php, but for reference sake, for reference sake, you should create a new page to do that. Okay, so I could modify this one, but I'm going to create a new page to do that. So I'm going to call that one form.php. Okay, form.php, and I'm going to copy my form over here. Okay, so in the using the same page to process your form, okay, that one, your action can be the same file name. So here my file name is form.php, so I can write the same file name .php. Okay, so that one, if I refresh, if I submit the page, so I have form.php. Now if I submit the form, it's going to, sorry, I need to take the adjust technology from there. So I need to remove the adjust part, because it's keeping the form remaining in the same place where it is. Okay, so if I refresh now, since the adjust is no longer there, you see that it has loaded. So because it submits the same file, so we need to process it now. Now, either you use the same file name or you leave this one empty. So if you leave this one empty too, it submits to the same file as well. So any one you choose. So any one you choose. Either you leave the action empty or you use the same file name. Okay. So now, to keep the values, you need to first of all declare a variable. So initialize some variables, the form variables, so that you set them by those variables. So we've already have these variables over here. So we are going to copy the same code there, so it will be faster. But I can just copy, I can use the one we have on the page so that it can be faster. Okay. So okay. So where am I putting this thing? Okay. So I've initialized them here. Okay. So you initialize them there. Okay. So this, you initialize a feedback to be 0. So we change it to 1 if it's successful. And response, we make it empty. So when there's an error, we will assign a value to it. So our first name will be empty, last name will be empty, all the rest will be empty. Then our tick checkbox, we are going to assign 000 to them. So whenever they are being ticked, then we change the values to 1. Okay. So basically that's it. So I can copy this part instead of that so that it can be fast. So in the PHP, you can have it there. This one was created. This one. Okay. So you initialize them. So when you initialize a value, now when the form is being submitted, then you can get the value just like we've done in the if. So you can have the if is set. So in the if is set, you set the values. Okay. So for now, let's forget about the validation first. We want to do them, so we keep the values first and before we come to the validation. So we have over here. Now remember, your initialization of your lesson should be on top of the if it's set. Other than that, if you put this one below here, it will override the ones that you've taken from the user. So first initialize it, get the value from the user so that the current values should be the ones we get them from the user. Okay, so the initialization should be at the top, not below after checking if it sets no. Okay, now when you assign a value, a variable to your input, all the inputs that we have, when we assign values to them, for example, our fn, if we write fn the value echo our php echo our fn variable. Okay, now in PHP, if you first of all haven't initialized this variable, you get a syntax error in that value in your XAMPP. Some PHP server ignore that, but XAMPP doesn't. For example, if I delete this part where I've initialized my fn, if I refresh my form, you see it says undefined. Okay, so that's why you need to initialize them first so that they will be defined. So now if I have the value inside, now I have the value inside to empty. So now you see that the error is not there. Okay, so now if I enter something and I submit, okay, now because I've also retrieved the value from the user and to reassign the value, whenever I submit here and it counts, the value I fetch from the user will still be that one, so it will be kept. Okay, so all the values we kept from the user, it will be kept. So this we kept the values from the user, so it will reassign them to all the old ones we initialize. Okay, now the tricky thing is that how do we keep these ones? How do we keep the gender selected? And how do we keep the drop down selected? And how do we keep the tick ones? Okay, but now the concept is that for a radio, and the ones which has been checked, we call them checked. Okay, so if I put check under female, when I refresh, this will be checked. If I put check here in male, this will be checked. So that one, we need to compare the actual value and the value we've gotten from the user. Then we know which one have been checked. So we write a function that will pass the actual value and the value we've gotten from the user. If they are the same, it means user has checked this. Okay, and the drop down we use selected. So if you put selected on the option, any of the option, if you put selected, if it has it means that you selected, so that will be the one that will be selected. So we'll write a function for that one now compares the value, for example, the value of our day to the value we retrieve from the user. If it's the same, then it means that one was selected. So we display the selected, we give the option the value selected. So that will be selected. Okay. So in this function, that's what we use the option selected and is checked. So that's what this function are for. Okay, so that's what we have this function for. So I'm going to copy and paste it over here. Later on, we will have the other functions we've already written. Okay, so when we call is checked, okay, we pass in the value, expected value, and the value we've taken from the user. If they are the same, it will display checked, so that one will be checked. And for the drop down, it will display selected, so that the values are the same will be selected. Okay, so let's implement it over here. So for the other ones, we just display their values. So in the value, we put in their variable name. So here it's going to be ln, here it's going to be phone, and here it's going to be email. So the check one, like I said, you need to call the is checked. So we have PHP echo is checked. Okay. So the expected value is nil. Okay. And the variable name for the ones returning from the user is gender. So if our gender variable contain nil, and it means they are the same. So it means that one has been ticked. Okay. So we'll do that one for the female too. And that one the female value is female. So if it's the same as our gender value, it means it has been checked. Okay. Then that of the date of the day and the other ones, the function is option selected. So PHP echo option selected. Okay. So what are we comparing? So we are comparing our D value to the day value we got from the user. Okay. And so if it is the same, there will be selected, it will echo selected, so that one will be selected over here. Then the month, in the month, we have 01 for this one, and the variable name is month. Okay, so if the month contains 01, it means that one was the one selected, so to be selected, I'm going to copy this one. This ones I change their values. This is 02, and this is 03, and this is 04, and this is 05, and this is 06, and this is 07, and this is 08, and this is 09, and this is 10, and this is 11, and this is 12. Okay, and that's of the year. The year, the same. So year value, our I, compare our I value to the year variable. They are the same, it means it was selected. Okay, so now the obvious, so the obvious to use the is checked. So I'll call the is checked. Same function as the gender side. Okay. Okay. For the profile, we can echo okay. Remember, like I said, the text is supposed to come between your text area tag. Then this one, we use the it's checked. So the value is supposed to be 1 if it is checked. So, and the variable is reading. So if the reading value is 1, then it means it is checked. So that one will be checked. So here we have Moise variable. have the same variable. Here we have the music variable. Okay, now for file, we can't keep the files. For security reasons, it doesn't work. We can't keep the file name. So that one, you can't do anything about it. The user will have to select again the file again. Okay. So basically, that's it. Now, I'm going to refresh my page. Then I check. I'll fill all of them. Then I submit. Then we check if they've been if their information has been kept. Okay. So very day phone 02400100010. How many? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. No. Failure. Date of birth 4th April 2018. Okay. Young. Okay, so I'll select all these this time. Okay. So I'll add. So check if all the fields have been set. So it kept this, it kept this, it has kept that, it has kept that, it has kept that, it has kept the option, it has kept that, it has kept that. Okay, so everything is okay. So I want to take this one through and submit again. Okay. So this is that one it has been ticked. So it's keeping the values. So that's it. So for checkbox, we use a check. So we write a function to compare the value we gotten from the user and the value that if it's been set, the value it will be to know if it's sick. You echo check. Okay. Then for the select, you echo selected at the where it's been selected. So the same. Then if this one just the value is equal to, then you echo the variables that you use to include the information from the user. Now remember, first you need to initialize all these variables first. Other than that, you get syntax error in your exam server. Okay, so that's it. So the next step, we've already done that already. We just copy our code that we use to process our form. So we need those functions we wrote earlier on. So we need all these functions to get the extension, add person. Okay, so we need this function here. We need this function here. Okay, now we can call the validations. So we can call the validations. Have we added the picture? Okay, so copy from here up to here. Okay, so over there. Okay, so here too, we are keeping the messages in our response and our feedback. If successful, feedback will be 1. Other than that, feedback will be 0. So if our response is not empty, initially it is empty. Initially our response is empty. So if it's not empty, it means we have a message. So if it's empty and our feed is not empty and our feedback is still 0, it means there is an error. But if it is not empty and our feedback is 1, it means it is successful. So we will put the display information over here. Okay. So here in the self submission, you don't need a spinner. So you don't need a spinning. So when you click When you click submit, the browser will be showing that it is loading. So you can write a screen for the screening. Okay. So now in the feedback is where we'll put our feedback message. Okay. So now you can write a PHP to check if our response value is not empty. And it means there is a message. So you need to know if it's an error or a success message. So if not empty response, okay, it means the form has been submitted and there is a message. So we check if our feedback is 1. So if our feedback is equal to 1, then we know it's a success message. Else, which is 0, we know it's an error message. So, we just display the error message. So if class is equal to error, then we display P. In our P, we display our response information. So response. So we close our P, we close our D. Okay. So the same thing with when feedback is equal to. So when feedback is equal to 1, the only difference is that here it's no longer going to be error but what? Success. Okay. So now I can submit my form, but I need to upload a picture. So this time, can I get a picture here? The pictures. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I didn't use any of these pictures. Okay. So I can use this one again. Okay, so I submit. Okay, so information successfully recorded. So when we go to our database, we're supposed to see that. So that's the information. Okay, now you can see that when it's successful, all these ones are still remain there. So if you want to clear those fields when it is successful, then in the place where at the top part, you need to, here, if it's successful, you need to reinitialize all your variables. So at the point it gets to the bottom, they will be reset to where it was. Okay, so if you want it to be cleared when it's successful, you just copy your field variables, their initialization. So all their initializations, when feedback is 1, then you just initialize them to where they are supposed to be. So in that case, so when it is so, all the rows field will be emptied. So first name will be empty, last name will be in full, will be empty, then reading will be 0, dancing will be 0, music will be 0, movies will be 0, so nothing will be selected. Okay, so now I change to Mohammed Ako. Mohammed Ako. Okay, to Ako at testing.com. No, the date of birth, no date of birth. Okay, simple. Okay, the novice can be any all of them or any of them. So choose the picture. Okay, click add. Okay, so as you can see, it has cleared them when it is over. The message says information successfully recorded. It has cleared all those fields. Okay, So basically that's it. So that's a third way of your processing your form. So that's the third way of processing your form. So I believe we've gone through almost everything on the page. So I scroll through the page. So the last part you were supposed to do was to display the content of your database. That we've already done it in our previous lesson where we displayed the content of our database. So that's the last assignment we were supposed to do. So I'm going to, the code has already been written for you. So I'm going to just copy and paste that code. I'll explain the key thing you should know because that code is easy to understand. That code is easy to understand because you've done HTML. By now, you're supposed to know HTML, so you should know how to write a table. Okay, so in that code, okay, so that is the code. Okay, so that is the code we wrote here. So function checkbox checked. So the checkbox checked when we are displaying the information when it's reading, we need to tick that the person tick that one. Okay, so this function does that one. So it compares the value we have in the database, and if it is one, so you pass the value we have on the database with one. So if it is one, we return the correct mark. If it is not, we return empty, so nothing will be shown there. Okay, then there are person function retrieve our functions from our database. It retrieves our function from our database. Okay, so we've done this already. So if this connects to the database, this creates the person's array. Then this selects all the persons we have in the database, and it's being ordered by the ID descendant. So the latest will be top, followed by the other one. Then the first one will be at the bottom. Okay, so we have our query. We look through our row, and we assign each of the row to our persons array. So array push each of the row, we put it in our person array. So we close our connection, then we retain our persons array. Okay, so when we call this one, we call the persons function. It will retrieve all the rows we have for the persons table. Then we check if that array value is more than 0. If more than 0, there is something inside, so we display its content. If it is no more than 0, we display that no person on record. Okay, so if it's more than 0, it look through them. But first, we write table, we give a width of 100%, border, to show the border, we give it 1. Okay, then we give the th, first name, last name, picture, phone, etc. Then we show the content. Okay, so now what I want to emphasize is the image, this part. So the image, what we got, the file name that we got from the database is what we add to it. But we know that our image is in the folder pictures. So that's why we have pictures, then slash, then we echo the name of the file we have on the database over here. So then that will be the image of our lesson. So I'm going to copy this code. I'm going to have a script. I'm going to call it persons.php. Persons.php. Okay, so now if I run my persons.php, it's going to display what I have in that person's database. Okay, so as you can see, the name, last name, picture, phone, email, date of birth, profile, reading, so the ones which has been ticked, the ones which hasn't been ticked will be empty, and so on. Okay, so remember, for now I'm displaying the date of birth in year, month, and that order. Okay, so later on in our previous, we write a function that will rearrange the date of birth you get from the database so that you start from the day, month, and year. So later on, we'll write a function for that. Okay, so basically, that is it. That is it. So I'm going to scroll through and see which thing I'm not explained in the code. Then I quickly explain them. That will be for the lesson. So this is a long video. So if you got to this stage, which I'm almost done, if you got into that stage, then it means you have covered everything. So what I want to address, which I've spoken already about it, is the get method. So the get method, normally when you submit a get method, that input is submitted, the data is shown in the web address, like you can see. So you see the inputs over there. Okay, so you see the name of the field and the value of it. Okay, that's what we have the get function. So the get, normally, if you are using a form that is not sensitive, the information is not sensitive, you can use the get method. But if it's sensitive, you need to use a post. And if you need to upload the file to the server, you need to use a post. Okay. Okay. But you will see more example when we are developing our application, because uh, some of the information, especially fetching things from the database, we'll be using the token values of the rows token values. So we can have something like token is equal to this, page is equal to this, or p is equal to this, and so on. And we can retrieve those name and their values, or the keys and their values. Okay, so we separate, like I explained, we separate each of the keys by end key. So for example, profile.php token is equal to this. So it means that the name of the field is token and the value is this. The name of the field is p and the value is this. The name of the field is this and the value is that, and so on. Okay. So if you have this example, for example, if you have this kind of get form, I can create a new form. I'm going to call it get. Okay. So here you will see that there will be, in the field, there will be name and the value that the user will enter, and there will be followed by end, then the name of the field and the value the user will enter. Okay. So to process the form, we still use the if it is set. So php if is set get. So since it's a get method, and the name of one of the fields here, name. Okay, so we can echo. Okay, so name, we echo the name. So we echo the name we hear from the user, the phone, and we join it phone. Okay, then we can close our P. Okay, so all this information, all these values, you see them in the browser. Okay, so now I run my get PHP. Okay, so we Godwin phone 02400. We go. So as you can see, so the name, was the name of the field. and its value that the user submitted, which we gotten it over here, the name of the field and the value the user submitted. So that is basically how the get works. So when you are using maybe your form, you want to process it with the get, make sure that it is less sensitive information. You shouldn't use get for a password because it will be seen in the URL. Okay, so basically that's it. So to check if the form for a get has been submitted, it's also if it said get, then one of the names of your field. Okay, I will see more of this when we come to our project. Our project. Okay, so I think that is it for today. It's been a very long lesson, so I believe you broke them down into sections. So at least if you use 1 week to study and you divide it into 3 hours, 1 hour, 1 hour each, and 3 times you'll be able to cover this content. Okay, but thank you very much. And if you have any issue, you know where to contact me. Send me a message. Take a screenshot of your whatever you want to do. Message me, email me, then I'll also reply you. So remember, we want our community to grow. Okay, so refer so that others who also want to learn programming and other courses which are taught on coolchat.com, they will also benefit as well. And this is voluntary work, so it's free, so you can make donation as well, so that the lecturers who are preparing the videos and the materials on the site that you come to learn and benefit can also be refreshed with your donation as well. Okay, so thank you very much. So also share with your friends so that our community can grow as well. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.